Hey writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Laura, one of Kobo Writing Life's author engagement managers.
And I'm Rachel, Kobo Writing Life's other author engagement manager.
Today we spoke with Michael DiMartino. Michael is the creative genius behind some of the most beloved Nickelodeon animated series of our time, Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. From his early days as a storyboard artist and director on iconic shows like King of the Hill and Family Guy, to his current renown as co-creator of the Avatar universe, Michael has been a driving force in the world of fantasy and animation for years. With his latest book, the indie published Both Here and Gone, Michael is pushing the boundaries of his storytelling further.
We had so many questions and so many things we wanted to talk to Michael about that keeping this episode to an hour was a struggle. But Michael walked us through his entire career from animation school to starting as a director on animated classics such as King of the Hill to the creation of the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. He really just walked us through how each step of his career has influenced his creative process and how he's taken everything he's learned and translated that to writing a novel and the struggles that he's faced kind of going from writing in a very visual medium such as animation and television to writing prose. He had so much insight into the creation of Avatar: The Last Airbender and so much insight into just what it's like to be a professional creative. So many insights, so much advice, some great tips on world building. This is such a fun episode and it was such a joy to talk to Michael. I hope you enjoy. All right, we are joined today by Michael DiMartino. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show.
Just to start things off, could you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm most well known, I guess, for being the co-creator of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I grew up in Vermont back in the day and always wanted to be an artist. So that's kind of where I started, was like interest in art, drawing, painting, that sort of thing. And went to Rhode Island School of Design for college, where I took a lot of classes in animation and film. I majored in animation, made like some student films there. And then when I graduated, I moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in animation. And my very first job I ever got was on a show called King of the Hill, which was popular back in the day. And I think it's coming back again, which is wild. And then, yeah, through that experience of working in animation, me and my friend Brian pitched the show that became Avatar: The Last Airbender. We went on to co-create the sequel series, which was Legend of Korra. And now my day job is still in the Avatar world. It's a little different now. I'm kind of like helping to oversee the whole franchise and expand the stories and the characters into films and TV and games and publishing. So it covers a lot of different like storytelling mediums, which is super fun. And on the side, I'm trying to keep up with my own writing. So I just released a book called Both Here and Gone that I self-published. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Now, you've mentioned that you started in animation and wanting to work in animation, but you've also worked as a director, showrunner. Like you said, now you're overseeing everything. How does your approach change to storytelling based on what medium you are working in or from what position you were working in?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, sometimes I was, a writer, like writing the actual episode, or I wrote some of the Legend of Korra comics. So sometimes I'm the one actually doing the writing, sitting down, pen to paper or computer, however it goes. But a lot of times too, it's working, on the TV show, it was working in a writer's room with other writers. So you're all, even though Brian and I created the show, we worked with a ton of super talented writers and artists and stuff who augmented and added to the universe over the years. So you're kind of just in there batting ideas around with everybody else and trying to find the best version of the story. And then, yeah, nowadays it's a lot of getting outlines or treatments or scripts and then giving feedback on it to writers. So it's a lot of a different kind of writing. It's like a lot of note writing, which is its own sort of like skill of like, how do you give, I guess, actionable feedback is what I like to think of it as. It's not just like, oh, I don't like this. It's like you have to actually like be able to articulate like what's working, what's not working, how could it be better, balancing being like, I think in my role, it's challenging because I've been on the other side and I do have, specific ideas. but you don't want to be too prescriptive about stuff because that can stifle an artist and writer's, creativity, and you want them to also have ownership over what they're working on. So it's always a fine line of balancing the like, oh, this is how I would do it, except I'm not actually doing it. So I just want to help, guide people to tell a better story and, make the whatever we're trying to achieve creatively for the show, as clear as possible and as entertaining as possible.
And kind of going off of that, like working on a show and working in a writer's room, like you said, is such a collaborative process. What was it like moving from that collaborative environment to writing on your own?
Yeah, it's definitely different. I like both for different reasons. But yeah, after working for years on the shows and in the writer's room, I got a book deal to write a middle grade fantasy series, which was called Rebel Genius, that I wrote a few years back. And so that was like going from like working with a bunch of people to like just being on my own. It was a little bit of a like culture shock. I mean, I love being alone and and doing my own thing, but I definitely remember missing like that immediate feedback of like, I'd have a million ideas, but I'm like, I don't know if any of these are good because I don't have anyone else saying like, yeah, that's cool, or oh, what about this, or what about that. You definitely, I think that back and forth with people is super helpful. You just get like the immediate feedback rather than let me try writing a chapter or a whole book and then see what somebody thinks of it, which can lead you down some fraught paths of like, writing a novel takes a long time. So it's like, you want to have some check-ins along the way and see how people are responding to it.
Absolutely.
And how would you say your work as a director has influenced your writing and vice versa?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So in animation, like the directing part is you're often, when I started out, it was like you're given the script by the writers, and your job is to kind of interpret it and come up with the shots, the character posing, the acting of the characters based on the vocal performance, that sort of thing. So it's very different than like live action directing where you're on a set working with people and stuff. It's very much you're just drawing, a lot of imagination, trying to come up with different shots and how to best tell the story visually. Yeah, I think for sure it helped when I went to write comics, because storyboarding and sequential comic storytelling, there's definitely a lot of similarities there as far as like you only get one, a frame at a time to tell this story. So that definitely helped. Yeah, I think just because of my background of visual arts, like it just comes naturally to be able to like imagine or visualize certain things in my head. I think the challenge is then to like find the right words to articulate the visual part, in just prose. Like I remember when I was writing those middle grade fantasy novels, like I remember one comment I kept getting back from the editor was like, I actually had too much description of like, this character is now walking over here and moving their arm this way, or like I think I was just so used to like in animation you have to kind of spell out every movement and where everyone is at every time, and so I definitely have learned over the years to sort of like you don't have to, once you kind of set the scene, like you don't have to like check in every paragraph of where everyone's standing around and stuff.
Yeah, you kind of have that reverse problem of what writers usually have, where you can picture everything fully, so you're trying to put it down on the page.
Yeah.
Whereas some authors have like struggle to visualize everything in that way. So that's interesting.
Now, like you've mentioned a few times, you are arguably very well known for your work and creation of Avatar: The Last Airbender and subsequent universe. And I know we could probably talk to you about that series for hours, but we only have an hour today. So could you give us like a very brief rapid fire history of how that series came about?
Yeah, it was around 2002. My friend Brian and I, we had been working in animation for a bit at that time. We'd had a bunch of different jobs between the both of us, art directing, character design. Brian was great at character design, art direction kind of stuff. And yeah, we were just separately, we both were, had the desire to pitch a show and run our own show. And we got a great opportunity through a development executive at Nickelodeon to come in and pitch. Brian had been working at Nickelodeon at that time. And, the interesting thing about Avatar, it was kind of an assignment Whereas the development executive told us, we had a meeting with him and he said, oh, we're looking for like a action adventure type of show, legend and lore, magic, that sort of thing. So we took that as kind of a prompt to be like, okay, what's our version of this? That's different than Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or that sort of thing. And, we always tell the story, like we were watching Miyazaki films at that time. We're super influenced by those, anime films, kung fu movies, that sort of thing, Eastern philosophy, and sort of all mixed up into our creative whatever, and came up with this idea of, there was, the way Brian and I worked, it was that very like back and forth thing where he would have an idea, I'd bounce something off him, and until we, got to a point that we were like both excited about the idea. So it really started with like that prompt, and then these different cultures based on the elements. And then the martial arts part of it was the bending, which is the people in the world can bend one of 4 elements. And then kind of the key to the whole idea was like, oh, what if there was this one person, reincarnated being who could bend all 4 elements, and it was their job to keep the world in balance. And there's a world at war, and they've been gone for 100 years, and they come back, and they got to, they're faced with this like daunting problem of like, how do you fix a world at war? And he's just a monk kid who doesn't want to hurt anybody, and he just wants to have fun, and he's thrown into this like really precarious situation. And then we just follow him on his big epic journey to heal the world. And he's still trying to heal the world.
And this series is really hugely influenced, like you said, by anime, by East Asian culture, and like a lot of mythology. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the research process was like behind that?
Yeah, it was a mixed bag of things. I mean, certainly in high school, and then I remember in college, and when we were doing that project, like reading Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey stuff, which was definitely a big influence. Yeah, reading different like Eastern philosophies. I was doing yoga at the time and getting into meditation. Brian was super into like all the kung fu movies. So there was like that kind of like, I guess, cultural research, just the stuff we were interested in made it in. And then, as we were doing the show, we get more specific because all the cultures are based on, it's a fictional world, but it's based on real world Asian and native cultures. So, we were trying to be as, sensitive to that as we could and honor those cultures, which is something we still are striving to do to this day. So it's a balance of like, we weren't trying to do a one-to-one and saying like this culture is exactly like this real world culture. So there was a lot of visual inspiration from different Asian and native cultures, and also, storylines and things like that. And, things like just don't have them eating hot dogs in this episode, like, or like very Western, it's often like, this is too just like American or something, or modern American sounding, either in the language or in what they were doing, culturally in the villages they would visit or something. So it was kind of like keeping an eye on that sort of stuff too.
I don't know what you're talking about. I think an Aang hot dog eating contest would be a great episode.
Yeah, totally.
Do you have any advice for authors who are trying to start their own fantastical worlds, and any world building tips for them?
Sure. I would say don't get too bogged down in the world building early on, because like that part's super fun for sure. And it's, when I think back of like, where did these like the stories come from? It is a mix of like, sometimes we have the idea for, oh, what if it's a world like this or a culture like this? And then we figure out, okay, well, who's the character and what would the story be? Sometimes it's reverse, where it's like you have the character and then you want to build the world on it. But I do definitely in fantasy, I think, it's kind of a long iterative process where, you definitely need some foundational building blocks and materials. But I mean, with Avatar, it kind of started out, it's very complex now. We have 1 million characters and all these rules and all this stuff. But like in the beginning, it was kind of simple. It was like 4 cultures, 4 elements, 1 guy can control them all. There's a world at war. Like it wasn't, I think the depth came in with each story we told. And we did do, back then we would do like the Bible of the show, which is like, it was more about like fleshing out the character descriptions, and world building stuff and how the martial arts would work and things like that. But, I think sometimes there's a tendency to like, oh, I'm going to write this, like, I'm going to be Brandon Sanderson and write the 10-book series or something. It's like, well, just start with one book. I mean, even looking back, like, in a way we got lucky. Like, we had like, we're going to tell this 3-season arc over 60 episodes for kids TV. And like we didn't even know if we would get one season at the time. I mean, that was partly our, being in our 20s, naivete about like, no, it'll all work out. In the end, it did work out. We got to tell the story we wanted to tell, which was awesome. But it also could have been canceled after the first season and been a half-told story. So that actually related to Korra, which was the sequel series. We took a slightly different approach because we didn't know. We had been picked up for like one season of 12 episodes, but we didn't know if we would get to make more. So we did take a different approach there where it was like, okay, we're just going to tell a season-long story with one villain that had potential. Like, obviously her story could go on if that happened, but if this is all we get to do in these 12 episodes, it's going to be a satisfying, standalone story. So, it's a balance, like, but I think with the world building, it's like start smaller and then start building onto it as you if your first book does great, then you can add more and more and more.
And I imagine when it comes to world building, it's kind of like the same balance you were talking about when adding in the visual description, when you made the move from director to writer, especially in prose. Like, you want to tell your readers enough information that everything makes sense, but you don't want to include like 15 chapters about why all the cars only turn right,
Totally. Unless it's, I mean, the filter we try to use is like when is it relevant to the characters in the story? Like, if the world building or the details, if it's just details for detail's sake, like the characters don't care about it, like the reader's not going to totally care about it. But if you're kind of experiencing it through the character and you're getting these world building details that have an effect on the character's arc or the plot in general, I think that's when it starts to, have more meaning and impact, because like you're learning about this stuff, but it also is helping you understand what the story's about, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. I think relating it back to the character is like a really good way to kind of keep yourself in check too. Because like you said, if the character doesn't need to know this and it doesn't affect them, why do your readers need to know? Yeah.
And it's always tricky with world building stuff. Like if it's not a, I guess a portal fantasy where like a character from one world is going to another world and they're like learning about the world through, because they're the fish out of water. Like, that's one way to do it, where everything is new to them. So it all makes sense that you'd be like filling in, all these new world details. But then if you're doing just like, I guess what Avatar is, which is like its own world, its own pre-existing world. The characters in that world know about this world. They might not know everything about it, but, it does get trickier because like you have to sort of explain to the audience, we use prologues a lot. That always helps sort of orient the audience. Like, what is this world? What are the basic rules? So you can just kind of jump in with the characters and enjoy the story.
Did you ever have a moment with either Avatar or Korra where you kind of wrote yourself into a corner and you're like, why did we make that decision earlier?
I'm sure we have, but I mean, there's just so much. I think by the time we're writing the scripts, we've talked about the things so much that any of those like, oh, that's not really going to work, has been filtered out, hopefully. Because there's so much discussion in the room between everybody about like, what are these stories going to be? What's the arc for the season? What are these characters going through? So like, we usually had an idea, even if we didn't have all the specifics, like we knew where we were headed, at the end of a season or the end of a series, even if we don't know all the steps of how we're exactly going to get there. It does help to sort of have like the ending or end goal in mind. So whether the stories you're telling are relevant to, getting this character to where they need to go by the end.
Now, you've kind of mentioned that you have now taken on a much more like high level role when it comes to this universe, but I'm sure that there was a little bit of a transition period, and the universe has expanded to comics, novelizations, adaptations, other mediums in which the stories of your universe are being told. What is it like letting other people play in this proverbial sandbox that you've created?
It's a mix of excitement and amazement, and also trepidation, and doesn't always come out how you would have hoped. So it can be a mixed bag, but that's why the position I'm in now is, I'm able to identify and help hire people that I think would fit. So it's always a mix of like a writer's skill set and sensibilities, and then just if they get the world. And it doesn't even mean they have to be like the biggest fan ever, but they have to appreciate it and understand it for what it is. And I think, when things get adapted, sometimes it just depends who's in charge and who's, if they have the best interests of the show in mind, I guess.
And when it comes to like filling up writer rooms now and hiring people on, do you find, and like, sorry if this is a hard question to answer, but do you find that if it's somebody who is a super fan, it's harder for them to kind of take a step back and see what's best for the story?
It just depends. Like there's people who are super fans who are great, and there's people who are super fans who are just okay. I don't know. I think you have to be a fan of it, but I don't know that being a super fan of it necessarily means you are the right person, for the job. Like there's plenty of things I love and appreciate. I don't know that I would be the right person to like adapt them, or
that's why I asked, because there's some things I love with my whole heart, and I should never be allowed near them creatively.
Yeah. So it all depends.
And you've recently released a novel, Both Here and Gone. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it and where the inspiration for the novel came from?
Sure. Yeah, this was kind of an interesting project because it unlike Avatar and Korra and the stuff I'm known for, this is not fantasy. It's a YA coming of age story set in Massachusetts in the 1980s. It's a very grounded, realistic story about grief and loss. And it's about 14-year-old kid named Jack, and he's going through multiple losses in his life. His father left his family to go walk the Appalachian Trail. Now his mom's selling his house. And then like right before the story takes place, his friend Alyssa had this terrible accident out on the lake and fell into the icy water and was technically dead, came back, but she was in a coma for a few weeks and now doesn't remember like the events around the accident. And she turns to Jack to find some answers, but he's like kind of avoiding everything. He's avoiding all the losses he's faced, and especially what happened on that day. So I love mystery stories. So there is a kind of a mystery element to the story about like what happened actually that day. And that's kind of the thread I use to keep the plot going in that story. But yeah, it explores grief and loss and, uncertainty that we all face in life. And so parts of it are heavy and intense, but, a lot of the readers have said that it's ultimately a very hopeful book, and they couldn't, once they started reading, they couldn't put it down, which is always a nice compliment to hear as a writer. So it's really from my heart and something I'm super proud of, and hope people take a chance on, even if it's not fantasy.
Speaking of not fantasy, though, was it challenging to suddenly ground yourself and your writing in the real world and the rules that exist within it?
In some ways, it was actually more freeing, because it was like in the fantasy world, it's like, oh, well, you can't reference anything. You can't actually make reference, unless you're doing like maybe a comedy fantasy or something like that. In these like worlds that exist on their own, like you're not going to reference people or ideas that are common in our culture or cultural touchstones or any of that stuff, which is always can be limiting in a way. Like you're limited to the metaphors you can use and stuff. So in this, I was drawing a lot on, there's like a lot about stoicism, stuff about Henry David Thoreau, there's Star Wars references in there. So there's a little fantasy reference in there. So in a way it was like, I enjoyed taking a break from the fantasy stuff and trying to I think the biggest challenge was like, I mean, the shows are obviously full of emotion and, big ideas and storylines, but like really getting into one character's head. This is all told like first person point of view, and getting, digging deep into the emotional life of this kid and trying to be as honest with that stuff as I could be.
Is that a world would you like to revisit and continue to create projects that exist in the real world, or are you longing to go back to fantasy?
I like them both. So I want to keep writing novels. So it's, it's more about finding the time of balancing both things. But it's nice to have I'm always trying to learn and trying to become a better writer. And really the only way to do that is to actually write. So even though I think every day I'm learning stuff about what works and what doesn't in stories, until you actually sit down and try to write something, you can learn all the theory and read all the, writing books, which I like to do, but until you actually try to do it and apply this stuff, it's, it all remains sort of theoretical. And it's hard, even people have been doing this for years and years. There's still there is an element of mystery to it. Sometimes a story just works, and sometimes no matter how many angles you come at it, sometimes it doesn't gel, which can be frustrating.
And you've worked with large publishers, you've published indie, you've worked with bigger studios. What would you say are some of the important lessons that you've kind of learned through your different experiences about getting your work out into the world?
Boy, that's a tough one. In some respects, it's you can't take things too personally, or, if you get especially working with, studios and other people, because I've been on both sides. Like I said, sometimes I'm getting notes, sometimes I'm the one giving the notes. So I get it when people are but I wrote that. I thought it was clear. And it's well, it wasn't clear to me, and maybe it wouldn't be clear to a reader. I don't know. So it's you just, part of it is just staying open to the feedback. And, a lot of times especially with studio notes, it's they often talk about the note behind the note. They might say one thing, but it's really getting at something else underneath that nobody can quite articulate yet. It's a very imperfect process. It's a very subjective process at times, because everyone's coming with different ideas of what a story should be, different experiences as far as what theories they draw on or don't draw on, or just, sometimes it's just gut feeling something's not working here and I don't quite know what to say yet. So it's, it is patience and openness, I would say, are super, super crucial. And then, working, I think it was sort of similar working with an editor, my middle grade projects where you'd get notes from them. And they were always super helpful, because I think especially in that context where you are working by yourself a lot, maybe you've shared it with some people, but often your editor is going to be the first person who's reading your work. And even if you think you got it, you nailed it, it's guaranteed there are things that don't make sense and character arcs that are maybe not quite clear and stuff like that. So just being open to the feedback is always important.
And what was it like now having all of the control when you decided to publish your novel on your own?
Yeah, it's cool. That's why I wanted to try it. I listened to podcasts about self-publishing and, knew a certain amount about it, but it's the same kind of thing. I wouldn't really know if I could do it until I actually did it. I could learn about it all I wanted, but I had to actually try it. So in some ways, I think for a book like this, it's a benefit and a challenge, because I did send it out to a few agents to see, just kind of gauge interest. And I got great feedback, but it was mostly it's not really a commercial enough book, which was kind of why I wrote it in the first place, because it was partially an experiment, but the people who have read it, it's definitely connected with them. So I know there's an audience for it. It's just now the challenge, definitely as a self-published person too, is how do I find that niche of people? And it's a standalone book. It's not a part of a series. It's not a mystery, it's not a thriller or a romance book or a fantasy book that typically do better with, self-publishing. So that, that's kind of the challenge now, is just figuring out how to get the word out, get it into the right hands. Cause I think I've gotten enough readers now that I can tell okay, the book works. it definitely connects with people. People have responded to it well and in the way I had hoped. So it is, but it's, I get that it's not going to be everybody's like, comfort read probably sometimes. But it's for people, who do want a little bit more of maybe a challenge in the subject matter and are ready to like kind of process through some stuff. I mean, we all deal with grief and loss every day on a daily basis. And I'm hoping this book is like kind of a way to help people through that in a way.
Yeah. And I would say that's something that we talk to indie authors a lot, that they hear from like traditional publishers, like there's nothing wrong with the book. We like it. We just don't know how to market it or pitch it to our marketing team or like what category it would fit into. So you're definitely not alone there. But I do see a lot of indie authors finding that audience when they do it by themselves. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, it seems nowadays too, there's so many niche branch offs of other genres and stuff. And, for this book too, I was like, well, it's a coming of age story. That's a genre that people like. So it's not like a, totally, random storyline or anything. So, but yeah, I those things, that's the thing. Like I've been on that side too, where it's like, you are writing, you have to hit a certain audience or get, this has to be a big seller or whatever. So like they have their bit, there's always like with this stuff, like the business considerations and, corporate whatever side of things, which people don't like to talk about, but it's reality. And then there's like the artists trying to make the stuff that they care about. And, thankfully with something like Avatar, it was sort of this amazing moment where the two overlapped pretty well, where I was like, we got to make the show we wanted to make, and Nickelodeon got to put out the show that's still being watched by people 20 years later, which is wild.
That is wild. It's also wild that it's been 20 years.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, me either.
So take a hard left turn. A lot of your work, though, includes like rather big and heavy themes. Like you've mentioned the grief and loss in both Here and Gone. And then also there's like Buddhist philosophy and war propaganda being discussed in Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I'm kind of curious how intentional it was to include these like rather timeless topics. And do you think that it's these larger topics that resonate so much with your fans?
I mean, I do think that's part of it. I mean, these are just like timeless things that, whether it's fantasy or reality or the time period, I mean, those are the stories I like, the ones that don't have a shelf life necessarily, or it's not just, I don't know, chasing a fad or something like that. I mean, that's the literature that survives, is like the things that speak to us on a very deep human level. And I think it's just something it's just naturally what I've been interested in, is like the big questions about life and wanting to understand what life is all about and stuff. And it's just led me to art, and then it led me to literature and writing and stuff. And yeah, my goal is always like, it is this balance of like, I want to tell stories that are entertaining, but also enlightening. And I do think it is that combo that are the things that stick around for a long time, because if it's just entertaining and it's fun to watch, it's like the popcorn, whatever, movie that you enjoy, but you maybe don't watch again or think about again. It was fun while it lasted. But I think, the films and the stories that stick with us are definitely the ones that I think have a deeper meaning and deeper message, even if it's not like nobody wants to be like, have the moral of the story told to them, but also we do look to stories to sort of like help us navigate the world. There's like a lot of like neuroscience research now and cognitive science behind this stuff, which I find fascinating, of like, there is just this like, it's beyond just like, oh, we'd like to be entertained. It's like, there is this human need for stories, because it helps us make sense of the world.
And though your work appeals to, I would say, people of all ages, like Rachel and I, your fantasy series and also The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra, your novel, everything is kind of aimed primarily at younger audiences. What would you say drew you to creating media for kids? Yeah,
it wasn't like a conscious decision, I guess. It's just like, I think, just being interested in animation, especially when I was growing up, was primarily a kid's medium. It's obviously expanded since then. But, growing up, it was mainly Disney. And, Saturday morning cartoons, and I'd watch like Transformers and GI Joe. Like there wasn't like a ton of choice like there is now. There's so many different genres and age groups and types of movies and styles and stuff. And then so I think it was partly just what I was naturally drawn to, and then. But now, I mean, I've thought about like, if I wrote like a more adult novel, quote unquote, like what would that be? What would that look like? And I don't know. I'm just always drawn to these like younger, just like the coming of age part of it. I think is something I really enjoy, because it's like it's stories about like going from like this very black and white way of thinking to like, oh, the world doesn't work that way. Like it's much more complex and a lot more gray areas than kind of you think when you're a kid. But I think that black and white thinking doesn't necessarily just go away when you turn 18 or something. Like so it's something that we all still have to be reminded of, I think, too. But I do like, I'm drawn to like stories about, especially like often too, like there's like group of kids. That seems to be a running theme I've noticed. Even with like this book, it's like the main character is Jack, but he's got his friend Alyssa and his friend Trevor, and they're kind of like a little team sort of as they're trying to navigate this world and figure out how to cope with grief.
And I think like, I don't know, that time during adolescence when you kind of realize the complications of the world, having like the peers that you travel through that time period with are so important. And like I too also really gravitate towards groups of people in all of the nerdy media that I consume. I love a good gang.
It's that nostalgia feeling. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm going to touch back on craft just for a quick second, because as somebody who has come up writing a lot of very dialogue heavy mediums, especially working in television where it's almost all dialogue, what was it like kind of making that transition to prose? And did you find that it was a little bit more of a challenge? And also, do you have any advice for writing realistic dialogue for our listeners?
Sure. I think the dialogue part has, I don't know if it came easier, but just because you're writing scripts, which are mostly dialogue, I might have practiced that more. I'm not sure, but like that part has always sort of been a little more easy to come by. And then I ended up I also wrote a fictional podcast series on Audible. That was fun to do too, because it was a different medium, but it was similar, where you're like, it's all you have is sound. I mean, there's sound effects and music, but it's mainly dialogue and what the characters are saying. So that was a super fun challenge too. And then, when it came to prose, I think this was the first book that it like started to click the balance between like dialogue and then like thoughts and descriptions and that sort of thing, and how to balance the two. I mean, as far as, it's hard to say what like a tip for dialogue. I mean, there's this great book by Robert McKee, literally called Dialogue, that I found to be super helpful. And I guess the thing I would say, like with all storytelling stuff, I've noticed there's this like, I don't know if I can describe this well. There's this it's like a giant fractal where like the things that apply at like the global level of a story also apply at like the beat level, or even like a dialogue line level. Like the dialogue is, I mean, I think this is in his book, like where if you're thinking of dialogue, not is this stuff people say, but as action, it's like somebody putting this out to try to get something they want. So they're saying things, and they might not be saying the literal thing they want. They're saying something else to, try to get what they want, depending on the character and the situation and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I think with dialogue, you never want to be like too on the nose with stuff of like where characters are literally saying what they're feeling, that sort of stuff. But it is, and it's also like a back and forth of like, it's not just like one line of dialogue off on its own. It's like in concert with all these other voices and the responses that character is getting from what they're putting out into the world.
I really like that. Your character isn't necessarily asking for what they want, but what they're trying to get. I haven't heard that before. I really like that. Yeah,
I think as an author, like there's like the stuff that's on the page, and then there's stuff as the author, like even if the character doesn't know it. And so in some ways you have to take kind of a more objective view of your own story, where it's like, okay, this is what this character's goal is, or this is the goal of the story. The character may or may not be like fully aware of that goal, but you as the author kind of need to be, so you know like how to steer them in the right direction and stuff.
And we've kind of touched on asked you a few questions about how your like history writing in the television medium has affected your prose writing, but have you found anything in writing prose that has affected how you write scripts or how you tackle stories in different mediums?
I mean, with this book, it was like I said, it was kind of an experiment because in television stuff, it's so outlined and so gone over multiple times with multiple people. Now, by the time you get to the script, like the dialogue stuff is like kind of new and fun and exciting, but you've kind of like figured it all out. So you're not like starting with a blank page, like having no idea what I'm going to write today, which is helpful. You know, like it takes away a lot of that anxiety of like, what am I going to write? Well, here's the outline that I have that everyone agreed is the story we're going to tell. But I do find like that can also be somewhat stifling. So I did want to try, like with this book, I wanted to try something that was more novelistic, for lack of a better term, where it didn't feel like I was just writing. Like I think with the middle grade books, like since they were my first books, they did feel a bit like, they're obviously prose, but it felt more like a prose version of a screenplay or something like that. And it's like, there was just something missing, I felt. So like I wanted to, you know, I'm always trying to like improve and stuff. So I did kind of gave myself the challenge of like, okay, I know I had a rough idea of the story. Like I had the characters and sort of this idea of a girl who had died and come back, and her, you know, her friend who was like, didn't want to deal with reality. So I had kind of like the basic characters, but I did do more of a pantsing style of just like, I tried NaNoWriMo and, you know, just like, I'm just going to write. I have this basic premise. I'm just going to write a bunch of stuff, see what happens. So it was a good experiment because like definitely stuff I maybe wouldn't have predicted in an outline, like came out of that, like characters and situations and stuff. But, you know, like at the end of NaNoWriMo, like you might have 50,000 words. You're not going to have a book until you like you can't publish that thing. So then it was like the work of like actually going back and like figuring out, okay, what am I really trying to say with this? Are the characters coming across clearly? Like, and it was much more like, I was trying to, I guess, edit or separate the like pure writing creative part from the editorial part. Cause I do think like sometimes there's a tendency to do both at the same time, and it's really hard. Like if you're, you know, trying to write something like, oh, but that's not quite right, I want to go back and fix that. And like you're editing while you're trying to like just create and get some words down on a page. I think that can trip a lot of people up. It certainly does for me sometimes. So if you can separate those two processes a little bit, I think it helps to just let yourself be creative and then come in later as your own editor and sort of like see what you got and decide if it's what works and what doesn't, that sort of thing.
And now as somebody who has experience being both a pantser and a plotter, which one do you prefer?
I did enjoy writing the book that way, but I think I would probably try that again for like a first draft. Because I think that the thing with outlining too is kind of like with the world building, like you can procrastinate a lot by like re-outlining and outlining again. And, oh, I want to make this outline perfect, but it's like, that's not your actual book. So there's certainly, you need that structure and you need that time to like sort of analyze a story and tear it down and build it back up and that sort of thing. But if you're like doing that before you've even, you know, written the book, it can be tricky. So I don't know, it does work both ways. So it's not like one way is correct, the other way is not correct or anything. But I, you know, it definitely in the world of TV and stuff, like you can often talk a story to death. So by like before anybody writes a single thing, and it's not really until people start writing stuff down do you see if it's really working or not. Because like you're gonna have 2-hour writing meetings that are super fun and like throw around all sorts of great ideas and, oh man, this sounds amazing. Or even I go off to write something, I'm like, it doesn't seem as cool as I felt when we were talking about it. And it's a long process of like working through the ideas and seeing what works and what doesn't.
I also wanted to chat with you about social media a little bit, because since Avatar started in, did we say 2002? So it's been a while. The social media has really kind of taken on a life of its own. have you kind of felt the impact of this in your work? And do you ever feel kind of a pressure to kind of hold or like beholden, I guess, to the outside expectations that come with that?
Not too much, because I memean, I'm not a very good poster of social media things. Like I have an Instagram and Facebook and I put stuff up there, but I'm not like, I've tried and I was like, it doesn't feel natural to me. So I haven't gotten into it from that aspect of it, but obviously I, sometimes see comments or see other posts and stuff like that. I mean, the thing about animation is it takes so long to make stuff that I guess in a general way, over the years, the comments, I've thought about comments, but it's more like the positive stuff of like the way the shows have endured and affected people and brought families together and siblings together. And like, I think about that stuff, which is awesome. It's like, I hope this show, the next thing we do is, has that same effect on people. People are always going to have their whatever opinions about we should have done this or that or whatever. But by the time you hear those opinions, like you made that choice like 2 years prior. So there's not a lot of like real time feedback where there's a chance to actually like, even if I wanted to, like take a comment and try to change something, it practically does not work that way.
That's what fan fiction is for.
Yeah, there's plenty of great fan fiction. You guys have fun. And it's all good.
Can you tell our listeners what you're working on next and where they can find you online?
Sure, yeah. Like I said, I mean, Avatar I'm just working on that day to day. I mean, the main thing I can talk about, because it's been announced, is there will be a feature film coming out in 2026 with Aang and the gang. And there's other stuff in the works, but we can't talk about that yet. And then, for my own stuff, I'm sort of I've been trying to like promote my book and then just kind of figure out like what do I want to write, write next for myself or for novels. I love mystery stories, so there's like a mystery story I'm thinking about, and so we'll see where that goes. But yeah, I have a website, Dante DiMartino.com, my full name, and you can check out the books there. You can buy the paperback book there, and then otherwise it's on sale at Amazon. And I'm gonna look into going more wide maybe next year or something. So just trying different things to spread the word. So yeah, hopefully people check it out.
Well, when you're ready to go wide, you call us.
Okay.
We're right here. We're ready.
Nice.
And Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. This has been so lovely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in picking up Michael's books, we will include links in our show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at KoboWritingLife.com. Be sure to follow us on social media. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook and Twitter, and at kobo.writing.life on Instagram and Threads.
This episode was hosted by Laura Granger and Rachel Wharton, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robothon. Our theme music is composed by Tearjerker, and a huge thanks to Michael DiMartino for being our guest. If you're interested in starting your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.